Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Drow Ranger. So Drow is a carry hero, and as a carry hero, how do we think about her? Well, she is kind of one of these quintessential all-around average, good at everything, but not the best at anything kind of heroes. She is pretty good at laning. You know, she's a ranged hero. She has a slow, all of these kinds of things. She even has a silence, so she can kind of dominate some lanes, but she doesn't dominate every lane. She's kind of squishy. If you get on top of her, it can be a problem for all of those kinds of things, but, you know, it just depends on matchups. Then, as you transition later into the, early mid game, she can farm pretty quickly. She does have a farming ability, but she doesn't farm faster than, like, a lot of, the fastest farming heroes in the game or anything like that. She's not a crazy fast farmer, but she does farm pretty well. She can also participate in team fights pretty early on because her innate kit allows her to do a good amount of damage and, slow people, control people, all of that kind of stuff pretty early on. But she's not like completely 100% focused on participating early on. She can still farm a little bit. She can also take towers and push with her team. She's pretty good at taking towers, but she's not the best tower taker in the entire game. She's not like, the top tier #1 tower taker or anything like that. And late game, she is pretty good. She's pretty powerful. If she gets her items, she can just do insane amounts of damage. But she's also not the best late game carry in the game because just kind of like Sniper and other things like that, any hero like this that's kind of squishy, a ranged hero that if you get on top of, it pretty much negates the hero in a lot of ways. So you want to stay back. You don't want to be against people that, jump on you, someone like Spectre, Storm, anything like that. So it's one of these things that this hero is really, really good all around, but not the best at anything. So I actually think it's a really good hero for people to start learning Dota. So if you're just getting into Dota, you're just getting into the carry role, whatever it is, just getting into any core role, I think she's a very, very good hero to start playing. I actually started playing Dota by spamming Drow mid, and this was back, almost 10 years ago, so the game was very different then, but still, I think it's, still a good hero to learn the game because it's kind of like Sniper in the fact that your positioning is so important. You want to sit in back, you have range, you want to hit people, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where, you're feeding and you're dying very easily, and if people get on top of you, it really negates everything you do, and we can actually see why that is when we look at her abilities. So it's one of these things where positioning and kind of having that measured stance of going in but not being too far in and all of that kind of stuff, playing the map really well and getting your farm, but also not feeding is so important. And that's kind of one of the basic things of Dota. And so that's what you have to know on Drow. And Drow is pretty much the hero for that. It's like you have to put yourself at the exact right part of the outskirts of the fight. You have to let your team do the exact thing that you need them to do to initiate and all that stuff so they can take the brunt of the spells, and then you're in the back dealing damage. Just unlike Sniper, she doesn't have as much range, so it's a little bit harder to position yourself in such a way. But she does have some defensive spells, she has some slows and the things like that that help her along with that. So that's pretty much how to think of Drow Ranger, but, what is she strong against? Well, she's actually really strong against other agility carries that have a bunch of innate armor but don't buy really armor items. And that is, we can see in a second because of her ability, because that pierces basically armor. So that's really, really good. She can just pierce people's armor. She does a lot of damage to people with high armor that rely on that but have like low HP. So that's one thing that she's very strong against. She's also pretty strong against kind of squishy people in general. She's strong against supports, all that kind of stuff. She's not the best, though, against high HP, low armor heroes in general that usually buy armor items because she doesn't pierce through that armor that they bought. So kind of strength heroes that buy armor items, she's not the best against. So keep that in mind. But something like Morphling, she's very, very good against. Now, what is she weak against? Well, she's weak against anyone, like I said before, that gets on top of her. So Storm Spirit, any Spirit hero, really. Legion Commander, Spectre, any hero that can just jump the backlines, get to the backlines immediately, that doesn't really have to, position themselves well, doesn't have to get into like the perfect spot, that can just kind of press one button, do one thing, and then you're on top of the person in the back. It's the same kind of counter that happens to Sniper. Now, she does have some things that can, deal with this a little bit, but it's still a very hard counter to her. Anybody that can just get right on top of her and man fight her face to face will win. So, because of that, she wants teammates that can go in first, that can either, make her have a little bit of a distance between her and the enemy and kind of play that distance game. So she doesn't like that, but she also likes a team that likes to go in. So any, tanky heroes on her team, she wants kind of everybody to cause a bunch of chaos while she's in the back doing damage. She doesn't like to have cores and other supports that like to sit back, because if everybody's sitting back and, she doesn't have people to go in for her, then she's just going to get ran at, and she's going to be the one that everybody uses their spells on, and that's just a recipe for disaster. faster with Drow. So that's pretty much how to think about Drow. That's how she's kind of good overall as an average hero, but that's also some of her strengths and weaknesses. So now that we understand Drow in general, we can take a look at her abilities and see how they work. So now that we understand Drow in general, we can take a look at her abilities and see how she's able to be one of those all-around carries like I talked about. So the first ability we're going to take a look at is Frost Arrows. It's a pretty straightforward, pretty simple ability. So we see here I'm right-clicking this dummy target, and then if I just click Q and then left-click on the dummy target, it shoots out a Frost Arrow. So I can right-click the ability actually, and it permanently puts it on. So now all my attacks are Frost Arrows. And you see there's a little bit of an animation that's different and a sound that happens to notify you and the enemy that you're shooting Frost Arrows. And pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It just does a little bit extra damage, as you can see there, and has a pretty significant slow. So if we have Axe run across here, now I'm using Frost Arrows, you can see how much this slows at max level. It's actually insane how much slow you're doing. And in the past you couldn't do this, but now you can actually combine this with Scotty and other things like that to just do insane amounts of slowing and just like make people pretty much not able to move when you're hitting them with Frost Arrows. Now, it doesn't pierce spell immunity. So basically, if someone buys BKB, then you aren't slowing them, where Scotty does pierce spell immunity. So keep that in mind. Now, the one thing that some people don't realize is that it can be very annoying to cast Frost Arrows all the time, because obviously I'm right-clicking this enemy here. I'm gonna have to right-click this to turn it off, and now I'm doing this. Well, in the middle of a fight, I don't want to have to go down here and right-click this. It's super annoying to turn this on and off. Also, I don't want to be, spamming Q, because that gets really annoying too. So I'm spamming Q, plus I'm trying to move. It can just get really annoying. So the actual way to fix this, the way to make this simpler, is to actually go into your settings here, go into your hotkeys, go to AutoCast, and then click the Frost Arrow, and then click Q for Drow. So if you don't know how to do all this, I actually have a hotkey video that you should go watch to know how to set all this up. But that's pretty much how you want to do this. Now, although you can see Q isn't selected there, what I can do is I can just be using my normal auto attack, and then I can just click Q once, and now you see it's highlighted, and now I'm using it. Like, I'm just basically using Frost Arrows constantly. Now, if I want to immediately stop, I just click Q again, and now I'm not using Frost Arrows anymore. So just one button press is the difference between me using Frost Arrows and not using Frost Arrows. And this is the perfect way to actually use this ability so that you can use it in the middle of a team fight. You can transition really quickly. Maybe, you're farming creeps, then people go on you, or a team fight happens right around you. You can immediately click Q, and now it's on. You don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to spam it. You don't have to, go down there with your mouse and right-click it, anything like that. It's very simple, very straightforward, very easy to use. So that's Frost Arrows, and that's how to use it, especially with hotkeys. So next, we're going to look at Gust. So Gust is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's a silence, an AoE silence. So it's actually really powerful. So what you do is you actually click in a direction, and it shoots out a gust. And it's a pretty far range, pretty long range there. So we can show you how to use this here on Axe, and it actually pushes people back as well. So we see Axe was standing there, he's pushed back, so he's like kind of mini stunned, almost like a Queen of Pain ulti. Because he's running at you, you do this, he has like a kind of tiny animation where he goes back for a short period of time where he's like stunned, and now he's silenced for a pretty long time, and then you can kind of push people away and, hit them with your Frost Arrows, all that kind of stuff, and it's very hard for them to get back on top of you because you're slowing them, they were pushed back, all those kinds of things, and then it's a silence as well with that knockback. So it's pretty good to not only silence people and push them back, but also create distance between you and your enemy, because that's very important, and we'll see why when we get to her ultimate. But before we get to that, we're going to look at multi-shot. So multi-shot is basically her farming ability. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but it's basically the ability that allows her to farm not super quickly. She's not the best farmer in the game, like I talked about, but she does have a farming ability. So what you do is you just click this multi-shot button, you click it in a direction, and then it channels for a little bit, and it shoots out 3 waves of arrows in that kind of AoE there, in that little arc there, depending on where you aim it. So this is pretty simple, that obviously if there's a bunch of creeps in the line here, you can just click that, and it shoots out a ton of arrows, and you farm them pretty quickly. You can also use this to farm stacks, to farm neutral camps, to farm waves quickly, all those kinds of things. Now keep in mind, you kind of want to learn how to aim it, or how to line it up correctly with the creep wave. Sit at the side of the creep wave so you're hitting as many arrows as possible, because they kind of come out in this arcing way and then get separated longer and further away. So you want to obviously maximize the damage you're doing with this ability by getting maybe close to the creep wave and those kinds of things. So you're using all of the arrows that come out here, but they also do extra damage. So you're not only putting out a bunch of arrows at a time. The arrows also do extra damage. They also do more slow and stuff like that. They also have a slow duration because they apply basically a frostbite-like thing. So it's kind of an all-around ability. You can also use this ability in team fights and things. Let's say an enemy's running away from you and they go high ground. You can't see them anymore. Well, you can shoot this and it gives a little bit of vision as the arrows go, and it also hits enemies, that you can't see. So let's say you're right-clicking them with your arrows, they go out of vision. Well, then you can channel this multi-shot because it has a little bit of a longer range, and you can hit people that you're not seeing and those kinds of things. So it has a little bit versatility in team fights and other stuff like that. Not just a farming tool, but it is mainly a farming tool. So that's multi-shot. And then lastly, we're going to look at her ultimate, Marksmanship. So this is a passive ultimate. And basically what this does is it not only gives a bonus agility to her and every, hero around her, so all of her teammates, which definitely helps, which is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It gives you all of those benefits that agility give, like armor and attack speed and damage if you're an agility hero, all of that kind of stuff. But it also pierces base armor with a percentage chance. So you see there's a chance, it says, and that's basically the chance that you shoot out a arrow that pierces base armor. So you see right there it happens. So you can see the changes in my arrow, and it's not the frost arrows. It's actually a change in the animation there where there's like more of a, bigger arrow that kind of is like more zoomy, I guess you could say. I don't know. It's like just a thicker arrow that just basically denotes that now it is piercing piercing armor, and that is base armor. So it's not armor items that enemies buy. So keep in mind that that's why I said that strength heroes with a lot of HP that buy armor items aren't that good. But the base armor is just an armor that comes from agility and other things that come from your naturally gained stats and stuff like that you're getting. So all the agility armor that you're getting, all that base armor that you have, this is what's being pierced with Marksmanship. But the key to this ability is not just what it does and understanding that it helps you farm, it just helps you do more damage. That's all you really need to know, is that it helps you do more damage, is that it actually deactivates when you're in range of an enemy. So you see, actually, I wasn't using it actually because I was in range of this dummy target. So we actually have to get out of range. So now I had this buff here, which is Marksmanship, that grants me extra damage and that proc chance. But if I go in range here of this dummy target, because it's an enemy, we can see that I will actually not have that buff, and I will never use or never be able to hit a proc chance for this ability. And so that's why it's not just like Sniper, where he doesn't want people to get on top of him because it's not good for him because they can kill him. It's actually innate to the hero that you don't want enemy heroes in that AoE that you see there, because if they are, your ultimate will actually deactivate. So it's very, very important to know this about Drow. That's why Gust is also so super important. When enemies get on top of you, they blink on top of you, they ult on top of you, whatever it is, you cast this and it pushes them back. And that's super important because if the axe is here clicking you and you push him back, you can run away for a bit, and then you can start, frost arrowing him and make it so it's very, very hard for him to catch up to you. So we see this again. Here, I'll do this. Now I'm slowing him. And now I can still proc, obviously, if the dummy target wasn't there. And it's very, very hard for him to get on top of me, and I'm just doing way more damage. So that's pretty much how you want to play Drow. That's how you want to think of Drow. And that's how all of her abilities kind of synchronize and gel together. So you can see why she can kind of do everything pretty well. She's pretty strong. She can do a lot of damage. She can farm pretty well. She has a silence. She has control, all of that kind of stuff. But she can be pretty weak if you don't have the good positioning, or if you're against a bad draft where they can just get right on top of you and those kinds of things. So that's Drow. Those are her abilities. I'm not really going to focus on any of her ags or ag shard. You can take a look at that. It's not super important. It just upgrades her abilities a little bit, makes them a little bit better, but it's nothing like core or key to the hero that makes her wildly different, so I'm not going to focus on that. But that's pretty much Drow. Those are her abilities. Now let's jump into a game and see how she's played. So now we're jumping into a replay here of ILTW playing Drow Ranger, and he actually already died before the game even started, but we'll just ignore that a little bit. It's not really important. What I really want to show you is how to lane with Drow and the key parts of laning with this hero. So you'll notice in the very first wave, the very beginning, he immediately skills Frost Arrows, and he just starts right-clicking the enemy offlaner as soon as the offlaner approaches the wave. And this is largely because, if you didn't know, any ability like this, like Frost Arrows, that enhances a right-click, if you actually press Q and left-click it on the enemy, the creeps will not aggro. So you see this, how he's constantly clicking the enemy, but these creeps are just, hitting away. They're just doing their normal thing. And that's because any ability like this, you don't want to right-click it. You don't want to have it auto-on like I showed before. You actually want to press Q and click it on the enemy hero, and then the creeps will not aggro. So that helps you maintain equilibrium, but that also helps you not take harass damage from the enemy creeps when you right-click them. Because that's usually one of the things that kind of balances melee versus ranged heroes, if you didn't know, is that obviously when the ranged hero walks up and tries to click, the off lane or whatever it is from a distance, they will aggro the creeps and the creeps will start hitting them. Well, ranged heroes don't have innate damage block like melee heroes do. So they actually take way more harass damage from those normal creeps hitting them than melee heroes do. And that's kind of the trade that you have to calculate and you have to consider with most heroes, but Drow's not one of them. Drow, you can just walk up, you can use your frost arrows, and you can maintain creep equilibrium while also not taking harass damage. So you see how aggressive he's being there because of that. Now, he's still going to use creep aggro occasionally, like we see him doing here, with normal right clicks to get some harassment, but also to drag the creeps back. So it's not like you don't want to use creep aggro, in the necessary times. It's just that if you are being aggressive, if you're looking to harass the enemy, you don't actually have to aggro the creeps because your Q allows you to do that. Now, other than that like key part where in the very beginning you want to get aggressive, you want to use your Q, your frost arrows to harass the enemy. You can also use frost arrows to secure last hits because they do, a little bit extra damage. So you can see it's not much, but it's enough that could make a significant difference when you're trying to, outcompete somebody for last hits that has similar damage to you, or someone that buys a quelling blade when you don't have a quelling blade, that kind of stuff. So it is important to do that. It's also important to know that Drow, as a pretty slow attack animation, all this kind of thing, it's one of these heroes that you have to be really, really good with positioning. I know I've mentioned that before. We can see here he's being very aggressive because he knows with the frost arrows he can be aggressive and he sees that the Mirana is not near the lane. But if that wasn't the case, and if he was against, let's say, a Tusk, and even a Tusk and a Mars, and he didn't see where the Tusk was, or the Tusk was in the trees, or they were close, he would not be playing that aggressive because he knows if these heroes get on top of him, he's very squishy, he's very slow, he can die pretty easily. So it's all about knowing the limits of your hero, knowing where to put yourself on the map, how aggressive to be with your positioning, where you can put your hero to secure last hits, get harassed, but also not feed. So it's very, very important to learn that with Drow. She's one of the hardest heroes to do that with, I think, in the game, because she really doesn't have that much. She doesn't really have anything to help her defend herself except for Gust. But the big problem with Gust is you don't love putting points in this early on because obviously you want this to harass, to do extra damage, that kind of thing. You also want to level multi-shots. You can potentially transition to the jungle, clear waves, all that kind of stuff. Gust is a defensive spell, but it's not the best early on. Doesn't last all that long, all of that kind of stuff. It's just the silence isn't the best early on. It is your one defensive spell, but it really won't save you, especially when you're that slow and all of that kind of stuff. It oftentimes doesn't save you. Now, occasionally you will put a point into it, but it's just one of those things that it's very, very important to know the limits of this hero because her one defensive spell is not really something you want to skill early on, and it doesn't even help you that much to begin with anyway when it's only one level. So that's pretty much Drow. Otherwise, you just last hit. You just play the lane normally like a normal ranged hero would, but it's all about, using the Q to harass and positioning yourself in such a way that you don't feed. So that's pretty much straightforward. And we kind of been seeing him do that here. I haven't really been talking about, what he's been doing, but you can kind of watch. You can watch this part back or whatever. You can look up a replay of a pro player playing Drow and just look at their positioning. Look at how they're being aggressive, when they're being aggressive. Ask yourself why, and then look at, how defensive they're being otherwise when, they might see that the enemy is getting aggressive on them or they don't know where the enemy is and those kinds of things. So you can always learn that from watching more replays of better players that know the limits of the hero. But learning the limits of the hero, so important for the entire game, but especially for the laning stage on this hero because you can have a good laning stage with most lanes on this hero if you play it correctly. So that's Drow's laning stage. Now let's move on to a little bit later in the game. So the next thing I want to show you is actually just what I was talking about. It's a small sequence here where he's almost 6, he's getting fairly strong, but because it's nighttime and he doesn't know where the enemy is, he actually puts himself in a pretty bad position. So the enemy Dazzle comes and ganks, and he ends up dying, which is really bad because he didn't know the positioning of the enemy. And you can see how a little bit of a surprise there. The Dazzle just coming out from the trees from behind the Drow, and that's just an instant death right there. It's pretty simple. Once the enemy gets on top of you, you can die pretty quickly. And then they go right back. He goes right back to the lane. He gets pretty aggressive again. But, it's not great to put yourself in these bad positions. And we can see, I'll fast forward a little bit here, a little more to show you how basically he dies again by putting himself in a bad position. Yeah, right here. So he walks up. He's trying to obviously, we'll just rewind here a little bit for you. So obviously he's level 6. It's just him versus the Mars. The Mars isn't even level 6 yet. He sees the Mirana, but the problem is this hero, once Mars gets level 6, it's actually not that hard of a kill for him. He kind of just uses Arena, uses Spear, uses his abilities, and then if any other hero comes, which Dazzle eventually does, it's a pretty simple and straightforward and easy kill. So you can see how, like I said, positioning from the laning stage through the entire rest of the game is so important on this hero. He starts out 0-3 largely because of the positioning, largely because of the big weakness of this hero. They have a lot of positioning abilities, a lot of slows and things like that with Mars and the Spear and all that kind of stuff. So it can be very difficult to play this hero in this kind of game. Now, they obviously end up winning this game, and I'll show you some clips from later on, but this transition from the laning stage to the mid game is very difficult for her now because basically she fed. This Drow is basically, 0-3. It's very bad. She's not very high on the net worth. Obviously, the Mars isn't having the best game either, but because of how aggressive, ILTW was playing in the very beginning of the game. But still, I just wanted to show you that kind of mistake, what not to do on Drow, and how that even though, when a pro player thinks that the positioning that he has is pretty good, it actually might not be true, and that's why, this hero can be very difficult to make sure that you're not feeding and you're getting the farm and everything that you need to get. So now we're jumping into a different game of ILTW still playing Drow. Just a different game because the other one kind of went pretty poorly, so it wasn't the best way to show you how to transition out of the laning stage. But basically, now he is, it's around 9 minutes. He's level 7. He's doing pretty well, obviously the most last hits in the game. And basically, this is what you want to do. Whenever the lane gets a little bit too hard, and hopefully you can sustain in the lane till about this level, till you have either 3 points or 4 points in multi-shot. That way you can go and farm the jungle like he's doing right now. So this is the perfect example of what to do when you feel like, okay, the laning stage is kind of over. If I stay in the lane too much longer against this Timbersaw, especially one-on-one or anything like that, I'm just going to feed. So basically what you want to do then is you want to transfer yourself, just transition into the jungle. You can eventually, start farming Ancients. You could even TP top and go to the triangle if you really needed to, if you're going to get chased through the jungle like this. If you're farming like this and you're going to get chased and killed, you can potentially do that. It's just up to you. But basically, eventually, at some point, right after the laning stage, this is how you want to transition. Now, if you have a lane that you can take, obviously you want to do that. That's what you want to do on most heroes. If there's a lane that's available that you can, get last hits in, sure, do that. But your hero does farm jungle pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, so, sometimes it's a little bit better to let a support like Bane we see take bottom, get some extra experience, get some extra levels, that kind of stuff, while you hit the jungle because it's a little bit safer for you, while it also allows a little bit more efficiency. So this is pretty much what you want to be doing after that laning stage into that early portion of the game. And from here, you're pretty much just going to be farming for the next 5 minutes. You're going to be hitting jungle. Like I said, any lane that you can go to, any fight that you can potentially participate in, if it's right next to your farming pattern, of course, you can go do that. Kind of like we see he's doing here. Because you do a lot of damage. You see, oh, he just barely doesn't get that kill on the Disruptor there. His arrow just was out of range. But you can see, you can do a lot of damage. You actually do a significant amount of damage with your abilities, with your multi-shot and all of that kind of stuff, so you can show up. It's not something where you're just going to be hitting the jungle. You're not like, I don't know, maybe a Medusa or whatever. You're not just going to do that. You can show up, you can push, you can participate in team fights, but you mainly want to be focusing on getting your items, because if you feed too much, you don't want to be trying to participate way too often and end up dying a bunch. It's just not something you want to do. So you notice how he kind of only went mid when it was on his way in his farming pattern. That's pretty much what you want to be doing from, 8 to 10 minutes to all the way 15 to 20 minutes or something like that, until you get a few items, until you get some kind of survivability item, until you get, BKB or Dragon Lance or whatever it is, or, Hurricane Pike or whatever it is that you need to survive and those kinds of things. And then eventually you'll start building into damage and all that kind of stuff to end up doing more damage. But that's pretty much how you transition out of the laning stage with Drow. So next, I barely skipped ahead here, and I just want to show you basically how Drow can get involved. So we kind of saw it briefly, and obviously, like I said, you still want to farm if you can, but this is a very good example of this game where he knows that he can get involved, where he knows that, maybe Luna's going to be farming and stuff. Luna's not really going to want to get involved because the nature of that hero is, if you're putting a lot of points in your farming spells, you're not going to be putting a lot of points in beam, so you're not really going to do much early on until you get a lot of levels and some farm at least. So he has a little bit of a better timing than Luna, so we can see how he just groups up with his team. He doesn't necessarily farm because he knows they have an advantage. Odie's dead, and so he looks to participate in team fights because he's able to, and we can see how well that ends up working out for him. They end up killing the OD mid. They take the mid tower. He ends up killing a Disruptor here. And just, this is basically how you can get involved with Drow. It's very, very effective. with this hero because you do provide a lot of utility. And you see right there, the OD walks up high ground, they have vision, and basically now the OD can't do anything. Once he gets silenced, now he's super slowed. There's almost nothing this OD can do, and now they get a dual victory and things like that. So that's just what I wanted to show you about how to get involved early. You can group up with your team. You can group up and push. You don't just want to focus on farming, because if you are doing like a straight up farming, you know, one-on-one, the enemy has a farming hero, you have a farming hero, or you're Drow and you're trying to farm, you're trying to outcompete them, you're not always going to win. So you do need to look to get involved when it, you know, there's opportunities. It's just for the first, you know, that 5 minutes of transition, that 8 to 15 minute mark. There might not be that many opportunities. It just depends on how the game is going. So that's just the judgment that you have to make. But that's a very good example of how to get involved early when it's possible. So the next thing is mid-game. After you have an item or two, you have some kind of survivability item, which is, you know, Shadowblade here. He looks to get involved with ganks, with his team. So he's been farming the whole time pretty much since the last time I showed you about 5 minutes ago, and now he's looking to get involved. And then once they get that good gank off on the enemy Timbersaw, and they're doing pretty well in this game, they have good map control, they immediately go to Rosh. And I think Drow is just one of these heroes that people don't necessarily think of Drow as like a Rosh hero. It's not an Ursa, it's not a TA, it's not a hero that you traditionally think of as a Rosh hero, but it actually is a hero that you really, really want to do Rosh. You want to control the Roshan pit, and you want to be getting Rosh very, very quickly, because obviously, yes, you know, there's a Legion there, and there's a Clop with DD, but if you were looking, a lot of the damage there came out from the Drow with that piercing of armor and all that kind of extra damage that the Drow was doing. So Drow is a very, very good Rosh hero, but not only that, but she's probably one of the best Aegis carriers, just because blowing all of your spells and abilities to get on top of her and kill her, it's kind of like Sniper. When you do that, it can be very difficult, because then you're putting yourself out of position, and now the enemy team can come help the Drow, and then she can, you know, use Gust, use BKB, use Invis, whatever it is that she has, her defensive abilities, get into a better position, and then start dealing a ton of damage. And so having this Aegis on Drow just makes her so much stronger. It just makes her not have to worry about positioning as much, because positioning is the main part of the hero, so it's very much something that you want to look to be doing as much as possible. Now, unlike Ursa or something like that, you can't Rosh solo. It's very hard to Rosh solo. You need somebody to tank for you. You're not just going to sit there and do Rosh alone. So it is one of those things you need to have some team coordination, but keep in mind, you want to focus on that as being a big part of Drow's game, because it's super important to get Rosh on her if you're going to look to push high ground, engage in team fights, and all those kinds of things, because the team is going to know, if they're a good team, that they need to kill the Drow, and if they do, that might be a lot of your damage and a lot of that net worth from the carry just like going to nothing if they jump on top of you. But that's why Aegis is just so good. So now we can see from here, now that they have Aegis, they're just like kind of making sure the lanes are good, and then just pushing and, you know, being very aggressive on the enemy team. And this is pretty much what allows them to win the game. This actually becomes a very short game. They end in like 25 minutes because they're just absolutely kind of rolling over the enemy team. It's a very good example of how to, you know, just stomp with Drow, because she can be kind of a snowball hero if you end up having a very good start and participate with your team in kind of 5-man. Traditional old Drow drafts, before she kind of was changed a little bit, were actually centered around grouping up 5-manning and just pushing down all the towers. There was like a Drow Visage kind of lineup thing that used to be the case. But this is still sort of the case, it's just not as drastic. But if you do have a good start and your team has a good start, you can group up, and then once you get this Aegis, it's just so hard to fight into a Drow team because of this extra agility you provide people and all that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. That is a very good strength of Drow. But like I said, she's not the best at anything, but she's pretty good at a lot of things, and this is one of the best things that she's good at, is like, once she gets an advantage, grouping up with her team, just pushing that advantage. So now we're going back to the other game, because the last game, I think it was good to show you how to ideally transition out of the laning stage and stuff like that and into more of the mid-game portion. But the problem was that was kind of a stomp, and they were just absolutely crushing it. So grouping up with your team is very, very good when you're crushing it. But in a game like this, where he had a very bad start, how do we have to think about, you know, that transition into that mid-game? Well, we can see exactly what we want to do here. Is he pretty much has been farming most of the time, and the key to this fight is he's actually just watching the entire fight, but he's letting the enemy use a lot of their spells, a lot of their initiation, a lot of their resources before he even thinks about TPing. And then once he sees that the PA overcommits and the team, you know, is all there and committing and a lot of their spells are down, that is when he finally commits and TPs, and then they get a kill on the OD. And you see how he's still kind of playing in the back. He's still sitting back. He's trying to let his enemy or his teammates take the brunt of the force, the brunt of, you know, all the spells and the damage and all of that kind of stuff, while he's putting himself in a relatively safe position. Now, obviously, they don't absolutely win that fight. I think the trade wasn't the best, but they are behind. They have been getting kind of stomped. So it was good that he showed up, because then they got the kill in the OD, they got the kill in the Mirana, those kinds of things. If he didn't show up there, if he didn't play that fight like that, then it probably would have been even worse for them. But you saw how he prioritized farming, he prioritized split pushing the top wave so they at least could get some trade of map control for whatever fight was happening, regardless of how it went, and how he showed up at the very end of the fight after a lot of spells were cast and things like that. Now, let's say, you know, you're a lower MMR, you don't necessarily always want to show up late, but sitting in the back, kind of putting yourself in a place where the enemy doesn't see you is important. Even if you're there, even if you're ready to fight, showing yourself early isn't always a good thing, because then they might just jump right on top of you. So it's very good to kind of bide your time, let the enemy, you know, cast some spells, let your teammates do some things, even die, you know, maybe 1 or 2 heroes, just tank a lot of stuff, and then you can come in and you can clean up, you can kill a lot of the people that are now out of position because your enemy, or because your teammates took a lot of the brunt of the force for you. So that's pretty much how you want to play, especially if you're playing from behind, but especially in the mid game or any kind of team fight where it's rather even or you need to be careful. That's how to play those team fights with Drow. So the last thing I want to show you is basically late game team fighting and how important positioning is in these kinds of fights. Now, obviously I've been saying the same thing the entire time, positioning is so important, but you see how he kind of like knows that they're in this area. He sees the Mars really quickly there, and then he positions himself kind of as far away from the enemy as humanly possible, also dealing damage. So you see he does damage in the Mars ult, lets the Mars ult be cast on his tree. That's a perfectly fine trade. Then also kind of like baits in the enemy PA to go on him when he has invis available. But you see how he's positioning himself as far to the left as possible, basically in the trees or where the trees used to be, because he knows that all of the enemy heroes are going to be coming from the right-hand side. They're all going to be coming from the right, from the top, all of that kind of stuff. And he's just basically putting as much distance between him and the enemy as humanly possible, while keeping his, you know, defensive invisible BKB spells, you know, available for if they ever try to overextend. And you see they basically did that twice. The PA went in. Well, first of all, the Mars cast his arena on the tree, which is a little bit of a waste. Then the PA jumps in to try to kill the Drow when he has invis and even has BKB and stuff, so has escape mechanisms, and then puts himself out of position to die. And then the OD tries to come in from the side, but the Drow's really far away, then obviously kills the Nature's Prophet, but still ends up dying as well, because basically because of his positioning. His positioning pretty much made that fight. Obviously, it was a very scrappy fight. It wasn't like a straight 5-on-5, but it was largely because of his play there that allowed that to go really well. Because think about it, if he was positioned to the right more, if he just kind of walked straight in, maybe the Mars could have, you know, gotten a spell off on him. Maybe the PA would dive a little bit quicker, you know, and not have been able to have the turnaround. You know, maybe the Wind Ranger wouldn't have been able to turn around as fast, or maybe the OD would have Astro imprisoned somebody and then ulted and stuff like that earlier, and maybe gotten more damage out on the Drow, all those kinds of things. You can see how positioning is so key for Drow in these kinds of fights, and putting yourself in a position where, like, you can kind of see even now that he's constantly just like letting his team play in the front. He's letting all of his teammates play in the front, and as soon as he gets in a position where he's like too out of position, where he's too far front, where the Wind Ranger's TPing out and nobody's in front, you see the moment that he is the #1 hero in the front lines, he immediately dies. He immediately gets gone on and dies. And that's just the perfect example of how basically this hero works as kind of a balance, like a counterbalance to how powerful she can be with doing damage and things like that in the later portion of the game. So I think that's a great example of how to play Drow later in the game in those team fights. But also, if you don't have Aegis, that's why I was saying Aegis is such an important thing. You can't put yourself in those positions like he was hitting high ground there alone if your team is not going to frontline. You cannot be the front person in your team. You cannot like lead the charge, or you pretty much will die almost every time. So that is basically how to play Drow. That's my Drow guide for you guys. I hope that helps you understand how to play the hero, how to understand the hero. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those kinds of things. All the links are below for my Discord, where you can request replay reviews that I do every week, usually on Fridays. My Patreon is below to help support me. For some reason, YouTube's been denying me my ad. You know, they haven't even given me ads for some reason. I have no idea why. So I don't really make any money on anything other than if people choose to support me. So go there for coaching or just choosing to support me so I can keep doing these videos. And my Twitch is below if you ever want to watch those replays if you miss them, or if you request one and then you miss it. So those are all the links below. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.